Marcus Thompson stood in his driveway, staring at the rusted 1967 Mustang Fastback that his three adopted children had somehow managed to tow home. Paint peeled from its once vibrant blue exterior like old skin, and the chrome bumpers bore more scratches than shine. Sarah, his eldest at 19, bounced nervously on her heels while 16-year-old Jake tried to look confident despite the obvious doubt creeping into his expression. Little Emma, barely 12, clutched a crumpled envelope in her small hands, her eyes wide with anticipation and worry. "Dad, we know it doesn't look like much right now," Sarah began, her voice carrying the same determination that had gotten her through foster care before Marcus adopted her 5 years ago. "But Jake found it at Mr. Peterson's salvage yard, and he said it just needed some love." Marcus ran his weathered hand along the car's dented hood, feeling the cool metal beneath layers of rust and neglect. He'd been working double shifts at the factory for months, and his old pickup truck had finally given up the ghost last week. The kids had overheard him on the phone with his boss, explaining why he might be late again due to bus schedules and walking. The car was clearly beyond repair, at least beyond anything his modest mechanic skills could handle. The tires were flat, the windshield cracked in a spider web pattern, and he could see daylight through holes in the floorboard. But as he looked at his children's faces, Emma's hopeful smile, Jake's nervous fidgeting, and Sarah's determined stance, he felt his heart swell with an emotion he couldn't quite name. These weren't just random acts of teenage rebellion or misguided good intentions. This was love in its purest form, the kind that sees possibility where others see only problems. "How much did you three spend on this?" he asked gently, knowing that between Sarah's part-time job at the diner, Jake's lawn-mowing money, and Emma's carefully saved allowance, they couldn't have had much to work with. Emma stepped forward and pressed the envelope into his hands. "We saved everything, Dad. Every birthday dollar, every Christmas gift, every penny we found in the couch cushions. It's not just a car, it's our way of saying thank you for never giving up on us." Marcus felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes as he looked at this broken-down vehicle that represented so much more than transportation. As Marcus circled the Mustang slowly, memories flooded back to a time when he was Jake's age, working alongside his own father in their small garage behind their house. His dad, Samuel Thompson, had been a master mechanic who could make any engine purr like a contented cat. Together, they had restored a 1965 Mustang convertible, spending countless weekends bonding over carburetors and transmissions. That car had been his pride and joy until he'd sold it to pay for his first wife's medical bills during her battle with cancer. The smell of motor oil and the sound of wrenches clinking had been the soundtrack of his childhood, but after his father's death and his wife's passing, Marcus had put away his tools and focused entirely on providing stability for the children who needed him most. He'd met Sarah first at the group home where he volunteered, reading stories to kids who had been failed by the system. Her fierce protection of the younger children and her quiet intelligence had reminded him of his late wife's strength. Jake had come later, an angry teenager whose previous foster families had given up on him after he'd acted out in grief over losing his mother. Emma had been the newest addition, a tiny girl who barely spoke when she first arrived but who had slowly blossomed under the patient love of her new family. Now, looking at this battered Mustang, Marcus could almost hear his father's voice. "Son, every car has a story to tell, and every restoration is a chance to write a new chapter." The irony wasn't lost on him that his children had chosen a Mustang, as if somehow the universe was nudging him back towards something he'd lost. The model was different, the condition far worse than anything he'd ever tackled with his father, but the potential was still there, buried beneath years of neglect and rust. "Tell me about how you found this car," Marcus said, settling onto an old milk crate that Jake had dragged over. His children gathered around him, their initial nervousness giving way to excited chatter. Jake explained how he'd been walking past Peterson's salvage yard when he'd spotted the distinctive Mustang silhouette beneath a blue tarp. "Mr. Peterson said it had been sitting there for 15 years. Jake continued, his hands moving animatedly as he spoke. "The previous owner died, and his family just wanted it gone. When I told him what we were planning, he practically gave it to us for free." Sarah added that they'd spent weeks researching the car online, printing out restoration guides and parts catalogs at the library. Emma had even drawn pictures of what she imagined the car would look like when they were finished: bright blue with white racing stripes and shiny chrome wheels. As Marcus listened to their planning and dreams, he realized that this wasn't just about getting him a car. This was about giving him back a piece of himself he'd thought was lost forever. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, perfect weather for what Marcus had decided would be their first real examination of the Mustang's condition. He'd spent the previous evening digging through boxes in the basement, retrieving his father's old tool collection that had been gathering dust for nearly a decade. The familiar weight of the wrenches in his hands brought back muscle memory he'd thought was long forgotten, and he found himself looking forward to the challenge ahead. Sarah had made coffee and sandwiches, declaring that this was going to be an all-day family project. Jake bounced around the garage, having arrived early to sweep out years of accumulated junk and make space for their work. Emma sat cross-legged on an old blanket, her notebook and colored pencils spread around her as she prepared to document their progress with both words and pictures. The scene felt almost surreal to Marcus, his makeshift family gathered around a broken car, united in purpose and hope. When Marcus finally lifted the Mustang's hood, the sight that greeted him was both better and worse than he'd expected. The engine block was still intact, a small miracle considering the car's overall condition, but everything around it told a story of years of neglect. Mice had built nests in the air filter housing, and rust had eaten through several crucial components. Hoses had cracked and hardened with age, and the battery terminals were corroded beyond recognition. Yet beneath all the surface problems, Marcus could see the bones of what had once been a powerful machine. "It's like an archaeological dig," Sarah observed, peering over his shoulder as he began carefully removing layers of debris and grime. "Each piece we uncover tells us something about the car's history." Jake nodded enthusiastically, already taking pictures with an old digital camera they'd borrowed from their neighbor. Emma looked up from her notebook, where she'd been sketching the engine compartment with surprising accuracy for a 12-year-old. "Dad, does it hurt the car to be broken for so long?" she asked with the earnest concern that made Marcus love her even more. As they worked together, removing obvious debris and cataloging what needed immediate attention, Marcus found himself naturally falling into the role of teacher that his father had played so many years ago. He explained how the carburetor worked, why oil needed to be changed regularly, and how each component played a vital role in making the car run. His children listened with rapt attention, asking thoughtful questions and offering their own observations. For the first time in years, Marcus felt truly useful, not just as a provider but as someone passing on knowledge and skills that might otherwise be lost. 3 weeks into their restoration project, the family had settled into a comfortable routine. Weekday evenings were spent researching parts and techniques online, while weekends belonged entirely to the Mustang. They'd made surprising progress in just cleaning and organizing, and Marcus had been pleasantly surprised to discover that many of the car's problems were more cosmetic than mechanical. The engine, while dirty and neglected, showed signs of having been well maintained by its previous owner before being abandoned. It was Emma who made the first significant discovery. While the others worked on the engine compartment, she had taken it upon herself to clean out the interior, armed with a small vacuum and an impressive collection of cleaning supplies she'd borrowed from their kitchen. "Dad," she called excitedly from inside the car, her voice slightly muffled by the cracked dashboard. "There's something stuck behind the seat." Marcus abandoned the carburetor he'd been examining and crawled into the passenger side to see what she'd found. Wedged between the back of the bench seat and the rear deck was a small wooden box, its finish worn smooth by age and handling. It was clearly handmade, with dovetail joints that spoke of careful craftsmanship and attention to detail. The lid bore the initials RM carved in elegant script, and a small brass latch held it securely closed. Marcus felt his hands trembling slightly as he lifted the box from its hiding place. Somehow, he knew that whatever was inside would be significant. Sarah and Jake crowded around as Marcus carefully opened the latch. Inside, nestled in faded blue velvet, were dozens of photographs, letters tied with ribbon, and a small leather journal. The photos showed a young man in military uniform standing proudly next to what was clearly this very Mustang in its prime. The car gleamed with fresh paint and chrome, and the man's smile radiated the kind of joy that comes from achieving a long-held dream. Robert Mitchell, Marcus read from the back of one photograph. Home from Vietnam, 1968. As they carefully examined each item, a story began to emerge. Robert Mitchell had bought the Mustang brand new with money saved during his tour of duty in Vietnam. The letters were from a young woman named Helen, filled with love and plans for their future together. The journal contained detailed records of every mile driven, every modification made, every memory created in the car. There were entries about first dates, weekend road trips, and eventually, a wedding day when the Mustang had served as the getaway car. The final entry, dated 15 years ago, was heartbreaking in its simplicity. Helen passed today. I can't bear to drive our car without her. The discovery of Robert Mitchell's memory box transformed their restoration project from a simple repair job into something much more meaningful. Marcus felt an unexpected connection to this stranger who had loved his car so deeply that he'd hidden away his most precious memories inside it. That evening, after the children had gone to bed, Marcus sat at his kitchen table carefully reading through Robert's journal by lamplight, feeling like he was being entrusted with someone else's most private moments. The journal revealed Robert to be a thoughtful, gentle man who had poured his heart into both his car and his marriage. He documented not just mechanical details but emotional ones, how Helen had laughed when the car backfired on their first date, how they'd driven to the coast for their honeymoon, how they talked about teaching their future children to drive in this very car. The dreams that had never been realized hung heavy in the pages, made more poignant by the obvious love that had inspired them. Marcus found himself thinking about his own journey as a father and the parallels between his story and Robert's. Both men had found themselves alone after losing the women they loved, but where Robert had withdrawn from the world, Marcus had opened his heart to children who needed him. The Mustang had become Robert's shrine to the past, while Marcus was trying to build something for the future. Yet both men understood the power of restoration, not just of cars, but of hope itself. The next morning, Marcus shared his findings with the children over breakfast. Emma listened with wide eyes as he read some of the gentler passages from Robert's journal, while Sarah and Jake studied the photographs with new understanding. We're not just fixing his car, Sarah said thoughtfully. We're finishing something he started. Jake nodded, already formulating plans to research more about Robert's life and perhaps even locate surviving family members who might want to know about their discovery. Their work on the car took on new purpose and reverence. They handled each component with extra care, not just because it was fragile with age, but because it was part of Robert and Helen's story. Emma began keeping her own journal of their restoration process, unconsciously mimicking Robert's detailed approach. Sarah researched the original paint color and chrome specifications, determined to restore the car to exactly how Robert had first envisioned it. Jake became fascinated with the mechanical aspects that Robert had documented, using the journal as a guide to understand not just how the car worked, but why Robert had made specific modifications and choices. Word of their restoration project began to spread through their small town in the way that heartwarming stories often do. Mrs. Patterson from the diner where Sarah worked mentioned it to her regular customers, and Mr. Peterson from the salvage yard told anyone who would listen about the kids who'd bought an old car for their father. Soon, neighbors and strangers alike were stopping by to offer help, advice, and sometimes just encouragement. The first unexpected visitor was Eddie Hernandez, a retired mechanic who lived 3 blocks away. He arrived on a Saturday morning carrying a toolbox that looked older than Marcus himself and wearing coveralls that had seen decades of honest work. "Heard you folks were bringing an old Mustang back to life," he said with a grin that made his weathered face light up. "Mind if an old-timer lends a hand?" Eddie's knowledge proved invaluable, and his patient teaching style complemented Marcus's own approach perfectly. Soon, he was a regular fixture in their garage, arriving each weekend with coffee and stories from his own restoration experiences. Sarah's English teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, stopped by one evening with a stack of library books about automotive restoration and classic car history. She'd been moved by Sarah's essay about the project and wanted to contribute to their research efforts. Emma immediately claimed the books with the most pictures, while Jake gravitated toward the technical manuals. Ms. Rodriguez also suggested that they document their process more formally, perhaps even submitting their story to a classic car magazine or a local newspaper. The most surprising support came from Helen Mitchell's sister, Dorothy, who had read about their project in the local paper's community section. She arrived unannounced one Tuesday evening, carrying a shoebox filled with additional photographs and memorabilia. "When Robert died, we didn't know what had happened to the car," she explained, tears in her eyes as she saw how lovingly they were caring for it. "Helen would be so happy to know it's being restored by a family who understands what it meant to them." Dorothy shared stories that brought new depth to what they'd learned from the journal. She told them about Helen's passion for classic cars and how she'd been just as invested in the Mustang's restoration as Robert had been. She explained that the couple had been unable to have children of their own, pouring their parental love into community volunteer work instead. "They would have loved what we're doing," Dorothy said, watching Emma carefully organize Robert's photographs. They always believed that love shared was love multiplied. After 2 months of careful cleaning, cataloging, and planning, the family was ready to tackle the Mustang's mechanical heart. With Eddie's guidance and Dorothy's blessing, they began the delicate process of rebuilding the engine. Marcus had initially worried that his rusty skills wouldn't be sufficient for such a complex job, but Eddie's patient instruction and his children's eager assistance made the work feel less daunting than he'd expected. The engine block, once freed from decades of grime and corrosion, proved to be in remarkably good condition. Robert had clearly been meticulous about maintenance during the car's active years, and the internal components showed minimal wear. "This engine was loved," Eddie observed as they carefully removed the pistons for inspection. "You can always tell when someone took proper care of their machine." Jake documented every step with photographs and detailed notes, creating their own version of Robert's meticulous journal. Sarah surprised everyone by demonstrating a natural aptitude for the precision work required in engine rebuilding. Her steady hands and careful attention to detail made her invaluable when it came to cleaning and reassembling delicate components. "I never knew I'd be good at something like this," she confided to Marcus as they worked together on rebuilding the carburetor. "It's like solving a three-dimensional puzzle where every piece has to be perfect." Marcus watched his eldest daughter with pride, remembering his own father's satisfaction when Marcus had shown similar mechanical intuition decades ago. Emma appointed herself as the project's official parts manager, creating an elaborate organizational system in one corner of the garage. She labeled every bolt, gasket, and component with handwritten tags, cross-referenced with the restoration manual and Robert's journal entries. Her system proved so effective that even Eddie, with his 50 years of mechanical experience, began deferring to Emma's organizational expertise. "That girl's got a mind for systems," he told Marcus admiringly. "She's going to be something special when she grows up." The breakthrough moment came on a cold November morning when they were ready to attempt the engine's first start in over 15 years. Marcus had rebuilt the fuel system, Eddie had verified the electrical connections, and the children had triple-checked every component against their extensive notes. As Marcus turned the key, the engine cranked slowly, coughed twice, and then roared to life with a deep, throaty rumble that seemed to shake the entire garage. Emma screamed with joy, Sarah hugged Jake, and Eddie wiped away tears he pretended were from the exhaust fumes. The Mustang was alive again. With the mechanical restoration essentially complete, the family turned their attention to the Mustang's exterior appearance. The original bright blue paint that had once made Robert so proud was now little more than patches of color between rust spots and primer. After consulting with Dorothy and studying Robert's photographs, they decided to restore the car to its exact original specification, Ford's 1967 bright blue with white racing stripes and chrome accents. The paint job represented their biggest expense yet, and Marcus worried about the cost until the children surprised him once again. Sarah had organized a bake sale at her school, telling Robert and Helen's story to anyone who would listen. Jake had expanded his lawn care business to include leaf raking and snow shoveling throughout the neighborhood. Emma had set up a lemonade stand every weekend, complete with a poster board showing before and after pictures of their progress. Together, they had raised enough money not just for paint, but for professional bodywork to address the rust issues. The bodywork phase taught them all new lessons about patience and precision. Under Eddie's supervision, and with help from his nephew Miguel, who ran a body shop across town, they learned to sand, fill, and prime with the same attention to detail they'd applied to the mechanical restoration. The work was dusty, tedious, and sometimes frustrating, but each small section of smooth, primed metal represented progress toward their goal. Emma continued her documentation project, now expanded to include detailed drawings of each phase of the restoration. Her sketches had evolved from simple childhood drawings to surprisingly sophisticated technical illustrations. Sarah suggested they create a complete photo album for Dorothy, documenting the car's transformation from abandoned wreck to restored classic. Jake had taken over most of the technical photography, developing an eye for dramatic before and after comparisons. When the car finally returned from the paint shop, the transformation was breathtaking. The Mustang gleamed under the garage lights like a jewel, its bright blue paint so deep and lustrous it seemed to glow from within. The white racing stripes were precisely placed according to the original factory specifications, and the chrome bumpers and trim pieces that Eddie had helped them restore sparkled like mirrors. Dorothy arrived within hours of the car's return, summoned by Sarah's excited phone call, and broke down in tears when she saw the finished result. "It's exactly like I remember it," she whispered, running her hand along the perfect paint. Robert and Helen would be so proud. As the family prepared for what they thought would be the final phase of the restoration, reassembling the interior and addressing the last few cosmetic details, Emma made another discovery that would change everything. While carefully cleaning Robert's memory box to return it to its original hiding place, she noticed that the bottom felt unusually thick. Her careful fingers found a hidden compartment, revealed by pressing a small, nearly invisible button on the box's interior. Inside the secret compartment were documents that told a story none of them had suspected. Robert and Helen Mitchell had established a small trust fund years before Robert's death, intended to help local families in need. The trust had been managed by a law firm in the county seat, and, according to the papers Emma found, it had grown substantially over the years. More shocking still was a sealed letter addressed to whoever restores our beloved Mustang. Marcus read the letter aloud with shaking hands. Robert had written it during his final days, knowing that he would never drive the car again, but hoping that someday it would find its way to someone who would love it as much as he and Helen had. The letter expressed his wish that the trust fund be used to help the car's restorer, recognizing that anyone willing to undertake such a labor of love probably deserved support themselves. The trust contained enough money to not only reimburse every penny the family had spent on the restoration, but to provide college funds for all 3 children. The family sat in stunned silence as the implications sank in. Their act of love for their father had been met with an even greater act of love from strangers they'd never met. Sarah was the first to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. They planned this. Somehow, they knew that whoever cared enough to fix their car would be someone worth helping. Jake nodded, understanding dawning in his eyes. It's like they're still taking care of people, even after they're gone. Dorothy, summoned once again to help verify the documents' authenticity, confirmed their validity with tears streaming down her cheeks. "This is so like them," she said. "Robert and Helen spent their whole lives finding ways to help others. I should have known they'd find a way to keep doing it." The lawyer who had managed the trust for so many years was equally amazed when they contacted him. He'd wondered for years when someone would finally present the restoration condition that would trigger the trust's distribution. Marcus found himself overwhelmed by the generosity of people he'd never met, but who had somehow seen into his heart and understood his struggles. The money would transform his children's futures, providing opportunities he'd never dreamed possible on his factory wages. But more than the financial gift, it was the message of hope and faith in human goodness that Robert and Helen had left behind that truly changed everything. 6 months after the Mustang had first appeared in their driveway, the Thompson family stood beside their fully restored classic car at the annual Founders Day car show. The event had seemed like an impossible dream when they'd first begun their project, but Dorothy had insisted they enter, and now they found themselves surrounded by admirers who couldn't believe the car's transformation. The Mustang gleamed in the afternoon sunlight, every chrome detail perfect, every paint surface flawless. But it wasn't just the car's appearance that drew attention, it was the story. Sarah had created a detailed display board documenting their restoration process, complete with Emma's drawings, Jake's photographs, and excerpts from both Robert's original journal and Emma's restoration diary. The display told two stories, one of love lost and remembered, and another of love found and shared. Marcus watched his children field questions from curious visitors with growing pride. Sarah explained the technical challenges they'd overcome with the confidence of someone who truly mastered her subject. Jake demonstrated his encyclopedic knowledge of Mustang specifications and restoration techniques. Emma, now 13 and more articulate than ever, shared Robert and Helen's love story with an eloquence that moved many listeners to tears. Eddie arrived with his entire extended family in tow, proudly introducing his restoration team to anyone who would listen. Dorothy brought a group of Robert and Helen's old friends, many of whom shared their own memories of the car during its original heyday. The sense of community that had grown around their project felt as remarkable as the car itself. As the day wore on and the judging concluded, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. They'd started with a broken-down car and a simple desire to help their father, but they discovered something much more valuable: the power of love to transcend time, death, and circumstances. Robert and Helen's love had created the car, preserved its story, and ultimately provided for its restoration. The children's love had initiated the project and seen it through to completion. The community's love had supported them every step of the way. When the awards were announced, the Mustang took first place in its class, but Marcus knew the real victory was something that couldn't be measured by trophies. His children had learned skills and developed confidence that would serve them for life. They discovered their own capabilities and the satisfaction that comes from completing a difficult task. Most importantly, they'd experienced firsthand the truth that Robert and Helen had known: love shared is love multiplied. The day ended with the entire family taking a ceremonial drive in the restored Mustang, finally fulfilling its destiny as a vehicle for creating new memories while honoring old ones. As they drove the familiar streets of their small town, Marcus realized that the car had indeed changed everything, not through its monetary value, but through its power to bring people together, bridge generations, and prove that some things really are worth restoring. The Mustang would go on to be featured in classic car magazines and restoration shows, but for the Thompson family, it would always be something more precious: tangible proof that love, patience, and hope can transform even the most unlikely situations into something beautiful. In saving the car, they had saved themselves, and in the process, they had honored the memory of two people they'd never met, but whose legacy would live on in their restored hearts as surely as it lived on in their restored Mustang.